Bem-vindos a Brasília, a capital que, por meio de suas linhas modernistas,
Welcome to Brasilia, the capital which, through its modern lines, shows a country of continental area.
No desenho de uma sociedade mais justa, democrática e igualitária. Bem-vindos ao Brasil. Ficção científica do passado, capital das águas, quadradinho, avião. Reconhecida por vários nomes, esta cidade criada para ser a morada de uma burocracia que se alternava no tempo, um não lugar, cedeu aos afetos e se transformou em lar nas mãos de seus habitantes e nas gerações que ali se desenvolveram. Gostaríamos de tê-los aqui conosco, compartilhando das belezas de nosso céu, de nossas águas, de nossa cultura, de nossa gastronomia e de nossa gente. Porém, os desafios trazidos pelo momento crítico que o nosso planeta enfrenta nos impedem de vivenciar esses momentos com vocês. Mas de uma coisa podemos ter certeza: se a pandemia de Covid-19 nos afasta fisicamente, ela também nos aproxima ao nos fazer relembrar de que os desafios que a humanidade enfrenta necessitam ser enfrentados conjuntamente, reconhecendo que todos nós compartilhamos de uma condição que nos faz humanos. Se por um lado não estamos juntos, por outro nunca estivemos mais próximos em nossas preocupações e necessidades. Vamos juntos avançar sobre os problemas globais que se impõem. Vamos juntos construir democracias melhores, mais transparentes, mais responsáveis. Formação 2021.
Queridas comisionadas y comisionados,
Dear commissioners and commission, and members of academia and international experts, and interested in the transparency, and we invite you to join here and to provide this and look at this different modality. And our host, the General Controller of Brazil, is casting several webinars that facilitate the exchange of experiences, and they make it possible the exchange of experiences and has a space for the new spaces that we face from all of our new trenches. So these activities are taking place in every Wednesday of every month, last Wednesday of every month. Among the topics that will be presented, we are going to highlight the privacy and transparency in terms of healthcare information, access to information, and freedom of press, as well as the transparency in digital governments. I highlight that every activity, there will be international experts of international organizations that are connected to our network. We invite you to look at the agenda of the 12th edition of ICIC on our website and social networks. Do not miss it.
Muy buenos días a todas y a todos.
Good morning, everyone who is present today, and we would like to thank your participation. This event named ICIC, we're talking about transparency and the digital government and the public administration by using artificial intelligence. I would like to greet everyone here, and after the video that we showed, and they're really good. So I'd like to thank the participation of the panelists that are joining us today in this webinar, this short webinar. We have Juliana Sakai, yeah, Mr. Joshi, and we have also Francisco Raul Alvarez. And we'd like to greet all the civil servants that are joining us in terms of the International Commission of of a Conference of Information Commissioners and everyone and all the institutions that, and we're going to follow with this event. Thank you very much for your presence. And I would like also to thank everyone who can follow us in the social networks. And we're going to continue all of the works that are taking place within ICIC. To continue with this event, I'm going to introduce our first panelist. She is Juliana Sakai. She is the operation director of the Transparency in Brazil. She is a graduate of international relations on the University of São Paulo, and she has a graduate degree at political science from Germany, and she works with the East Timor and international transparency also. So now we welcome her. Go ahead, you have the floor, Juliana. Thank you, the organizers of the event. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate of this important debate with Transparency Brazil that has supported the organization of this event. And I'm extremely happy to be here sharing with you a little bit of our experience in terms of algorithm transparency. Transparency Brazil is an organization and civil society that has worked for over 20 years in promotion of social control. And most recently, we have faced a few questions of algorithm transparency. Since last year, we started working in a project which is called Algorithm Transparency, which raises the same questions and issues of this panel, which is how to grant access to and to information and accountability of the government and the use of artificial intelligence tools, and especially what are the risks to human rights and of these tools that are used to improve the efficiency of public service and the consequences that these tools can bring. And we made a study in partnership with the National Controller's Office, the Ministry of Science and Technology, and to develop a questionnaire that was sent to over 300 government agencies of the federal government. And additionally, we have sent a series of requests to access to information to courts and court of audits and to National Congress as well. And as a result, we had many hundreds of answers, and we cataloged 44 systems that are being used in the Brazilian state, especially in the federal government. And looking at these tools, what we saw was that most of them are used as a decision-making tool, and most of them can help. They provide support to decision-making process, and other ones are used to speed up internal procedures. But a lot of them will help decisions, and a person will see this, but they will impact directly the policy of these public services. These tools interact with the civil servants. Very few tools are designed as the chatbots to interact with the external audience. So what we have as a result is that there is a series of tools that have been developed and implemented that will generate an impact, but will also be hidden from the population or from the public because they are supporting the decision-making process of the civil servant. And with these results, we have seen a lot of articles, read a lot of articles, and because this is being discussed very thoroughly, the usage of AI, and we developed a framework for risk analysis that can be used both by civil society to ask about how specific tools are being used and if they do represent any risk to the rights, or by the public manager in trying to implement or designing or acquiring this tool. We mapped three specific risks, and we divided this in three categories that always show up, which is the algorithm discrimination, which can appear in specific moments when building or designing an algorithm, by starting with a database that is not representative, or the way that we are going to use this data to generate the algorithm. So in specific moments, we have the algorithm discrimination, and there is also the right to privacy. So we've been talking about a huge amount of data, and they are connected to people, and this might infringe on the privacy rights, a right to privacy. And the last threat, which is connected to these tools, is this restriction to the civic space that, considering its surveillance characteristic and know and to track people, what people are doing through the use of smartphones, we see a potential threat and a potential an authoritarian bias, and it can be used to restrict opposition to the government, to the current government. So there are other risks that are specific to that are attributed to the nature of the tool. I'm sorry, the truck is passing by here. So consumer rights, children's rights, there are a series of rights that can be threatened depending on the nature of the tool and its goal and the database that is being used. So this framework was used as a questionnaire in which you can gauge the results by asking questions about the tool that was created. Additionally, what we see is the following. In order to be able to assess this precisely, we need information. So besides designing this risk assessment framework, we had to assess the transparency as well, because we need access to this information and to other ones to be able to assess and guarantee the accountability. So what happens today here in Brazil? We still don't have a legal framework for active transparency for this device, and that's why Transparency Brazil had to work with other agencies, and because the government itself didn't know really well what the situation was like. So the there was an original mapping that provided a transparency for everyone involved. And starting with this, we wrote down a few recommendations regarding governance. All of these materials are at the website, on the website of Transparency Brazil. But before ending my talk, it's the recommendation about accountability, and the government needs to be able to explain what the algorithm is like, and for the citizen to understand how these decisions were made, and to have the justification for these decisions. And in order to do that, we need an access to information, we need to disclosure of and publicizing of this information. So of all of the artificial intelligence systems that might cause an impact in this situation, and it might harm citizens when they involve sensitive data. So we recommend actively for the source code to be open. And whenever it's not possible, the output data, input data
rastrear o funcionamento da ferramenta e que a sociedade civil possa também
of this data algorithm, so civil society can assess the results and can also hold the government accountable. We recommend that this periodic audits should take place so we can assess if there are not foreseen consequences after using these tools. And it's only through transparency into the access to information that civil society will be able to know whether the artificial intelligence systems have been implemented ethically and according to the human rights that everybody has to abide by. Without that, we cannot carry out the basic. We do not know what the government is doing, and that's the idea. That's basically the idea that I wanted to mention and the topics that I wanted to raise. And the materials that I mentioned or that I referred to are all in the website at transparency.gov.br.org.br actually. And I'm here available to talk to you about it during the event. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juliana Sakai. It's very interesting what you have explained about the transparency and how you can use these tools for citizenship and for civil society. Always looking at way trying to guarantee the access to the information, but also seeing how you can protect this sensitive data. That was very interesting, how these tools interact with this internal internal audience and the chatbots with the outside bot, outside space. And now Mr. Yoshi, he is investigating and he studies about the open government partnership. And he is a lawyer who investigates the intersection between technology, regulation, and society. As a member of the Policy Fellow, focused on the machine and to articulate an equitative organization. And I believe that it's going to work of this idea, and it has a project that assesses global policy and public responsibility when Arnold Institute at the Lovelace Institute and the Open Governance Partnership, and to contribute with countries to the debate about the intellectual property law in India. He is conducting a research about a public law of investigation of open data in India, and he is a visiting member of MSCBS and exploring the intersection between politics and this information in India. You have the floor now, Mr. Yoshi.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Along with everything that Juliana said, and thank you for the intervention, I've been working for the last few years on aspects of algorithmic transparency. I think, as has already been mentioned in the past, there's been a lot of discussion around the growing use of algorithmic systems in public administration and in government. And these systems increasingly make very consequential decisions. They're used to plan how urban utilities and resources should be allocated, for example, electricity or water, or how roads should be mapped, or how cities should be created. They're also used to make welfare decisions about childcare, about health, about welfare entitlements of different people, and to flag insurance fraud, for example, when the government is giving out credit to people. Now, while these systems are being used more and more, the efforts towards public transparency have not kept pace with this. And my fear is that we risk losing out on decades of progress towards public accountability and transparency that have been gained through the wonderful work that many of you have also done on freedom of information laws and on public accountability measures. And the experience from the recent past indicates this. Governments and the people making these tools for governments have been very reluctant to provide transparency into the details of these systems. In fact, even to courts, to the highest judicial authorities, when asked for information on how these systems work, there have been examples where this information is not provided. There was a recent case in the Netherlands regarding a systematic risk assessment algorithmic tool, where the court thankfully struck that down because it was not transparent enough and the government refused to provide insight into the data used, as well as the algorithmic system that was being used to make decisions about welfare fraud. Similarly, but on the other side of the spectrum, when an algorithm called Compass was used in the US to make decisions about the bail of certain criminal defendants, the purveyor of that tool, the creator of that tool, refused to provide the same system, refused to provide details about the system, but the court, for different reasons, upheld the use of that system in any case, even without the transparency. So I think it's very crucial that we start thinking very carefully about what impact this has on systems like freedom of information laws, systems like discovery in courts, when consequential decisions are being made about the public and about individuals, but they know very little about how these systems actually work. So in furtherance of that, around April of this year, a group of institutions, including the Open Government Partnership, the AI Now Institute, which is part of the New York University, and the Ada Lovelace Institute in the UK, they got together to conduct a research project of which I was the lead researcher. And this was a project that aimed to map interventions made by government towards ensuring public sector accountability in the use of algorithmic systems. We ended up surveying more than 20 jurisdictions and more than 40 different policies that were intended towards transparency and accountability, with a view to both mapping the kinds of interventions that are being made and also trying to understand what the effect of these interventions has been. What has been successful? What are the challenges that are being faced? How can these interventions be improved? Specifically, when dealing with the transparency of algorithmic systems and those used in public administration particularly, we saw, and this is all from the side of the government itself, not from the lens of an activist or civil society, but we interviewed public officials working in government or officials, and they noted that there were two broad categories of obstacles towards algorithmic transparency. The first was countervailing policy requirements. Because when you have transparency on one side, there are also reasons to keep certain kinds of information secret. And we've all encountered this. There are exceptions built into freedom of information laws. But in general, there are aspects of government secrecy, of security of the particular system. This was a big concern that if we release details about an algorithmic system, people will start gaming it. People will start trying to defraud that, how it works. There were concerns about the privacy of the people whose data might be included in the system. So they don't want to release the data, as Juliana said, of what goes into the system or what comes out, because it could implicate the personal individual privacy of individuals in that system. Another big concern, and I face this personally in filing freedom of information requests with the government of India, has been trade secrets and commercial interests that are countervailing against freedom of information, because a lot of these laws and contracts that are signed between the government and the proprietors of algorithmic systems have exceptions that say that the logic of an algorithmic system or the source code or the data are all private information that are the trade secret of the person who's built the system. And for that reason, governments as well as the private players are reluctant to actually give that information to the public, and in many cases even provide that information to public auditors or to the government department that they're supplying to. And this is a big challenge. Now, and this, I think, is a larger question around the political economy of how these systems are being built and integrated. Oftentimes, and in most cases, I would say it's not a government department that itself is creating the policy and encoding the system, which is then being deployed. It's a private player which uses its own biases, uses its own determinations, and in many ways it's responsible for making the public policy that these systems then go on to enforce, with very little transparency either to the public or to the public administration and the people using these systems. So that was the first category of the challenge to transparency, the countervailing policy objectives. The second category was thinking about what meaningful transparency might be. And this is because there's a lot of different kinds of information that can be pertinent when you're talking about algorithmic transparency. Do you want to know about the data? Do you want to know about the source code? Do you want to know about the people who are using the system, or how it was developed? What audit trail exists? And there's countless kinds of information. In one of the cases that we spoke to with the government using these systems, they said that we tried to release as much data as possible about the system, but it was so much that in the end, when we released these thousands of documents, nobody knew what was going on in any case. It was too difficult for people to understand so many difficult and technical documents. And that's why I think when thinking about algorithmic transparency, we need to keep in mind the broader context in which it's being used. And most importantly, keep in mind the audience which we want to be transparent to. If we want to be transparent to a technical audience, it might make sense in some cases to focus on the openness of the source code, as Juliana said, that you want the source code to be technically audited and the data to be technically audited. But that's a limited kind of transparency. If someone were to release the source code to me, and I was flagged as a fraudulent transaction by an algorithmic system used by the government, I would not be able to make any sense of it. Which is why we need different kinds of transparency for different kinds of actors. In some cases, yes, the source code should be made public and should be auditable. In other cases, other kinds of information, the simple logic that is used by a system, which I can understand, and then I can maybe try to challenge it. In other cases, we should know, for example, how much money was spent on a particular system, because, as you know, public finance, activists, particularly on freedom of information, are very, they find it very important to know how public finance is used and use that as a metric of challenging the use of these systems as well. We should also have information about when these systems go wrong. That's an important classifier. That's an important piece of information to know about where these systems are used, how they were used, how many times it was flagged as being incorrect, how many times it was flagged as being correct. So there's these whole category of informations, and out of that, it's important to understand which audience is being targeted for transparency purposes, and then release information accordingly to those audiences. One of the examples that we saw, or one recent trend, which hopefully will catch on in other parts of the world, is this idea of creating open public registries of algorithmic systems. And we've seen this in Amsterdam, in Helsinki, in many jurisdictions in France, as well as in Ontario in Canada, where they have created a single source of truth, a kind of resource where the public can go and see what systems are being used in a particular city. They can get different kinds of information about the system, for example, where it was used, who commissioned it, who's responsible for it. And in some cases, maybe they can also get the source code or request other kinds of information from the system. So these algorithmic registries are one tool of transparency that I think are important and emerging, which people should look towards. But I think broadly, we need to start considering what our laws, particularly freedom of information laws, need to do in order to keep up with this enclosure of publicly important information, because of the ways in which these systems are non-transparent, both because of the interaction between private players and trade secrets and confidentiality, because of the inherent nature of these systems, which is that often, as kind of these complex mathematical systems, we simply don't know what's happening in them, and we are unable to interrogate them. So I will post a link to 2 documents which I think might be important for all of you to read interested in this project. One will be the executive summary and the full report that we did on algorithmic accountability in the public sector. And the second will be a short piece that I wrote specifically concerning freedom of information law and algorithmic transparency. And I hope that's useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joshi. I would like to say that what you said, it's, the development of technologies is fundamental for us to walk towards a modernization with the use of digital tools. It has challenges. There are a few risks that have to be taken into account, such as the algorithm discrimination and the respect of privacy to people. And at the same way, we have to make them transparent, and the parts of these codes can be made available so that we can see the failures and the protocols of artificial intelligence, how they were designed in a way that there is accountability and they can be more transparent, these source codes. And considering the processes that are going on. And this information has to be publicized so that there is a redefining of these decisions. I congratulate you for this project and to guarantee the access to information and the 4 policies that you have, as you have mentioned, have a lot of obstacles right now, and one of them is the paradigm of these policies. As you have highlighted, the importance of transparency is very significant. Thank you very much for your talk. And now we're going to continue with Mr. Francisco Alvarez. He's a specialist in open government and transparency and a master in political analysis and means of information, as well as he is a graduate in political science and public administration. He has a specialization in transparency, in open government, citizenship, and corruption fighting, negotiation, risk management, and solve conflicts resolution, and strategic planning. The same way, I will be the first one to congratulate him because he was designated as the member of the Citizen Council of Fighting Against Corruptions in Mexico. So thank you. Welcome. You have the floor now. Thank you, Secretary Eliana, for this introduction. And I also thank this doctor. And we're talking about the situation here. Okay, so I would like to greet everyone who's joining us in this streaming. And I would like to thank for the invitation of the National Controller's Office here in Brazil and the International Conference of Information Commissioners. And I also salute Secretary Dago and Juliana and everyone who's joining us here. I was thinking about exactly the topic that it brings us here to think about and to talk about. It was a very interesting topic because talking about transparency, it's a big topic that it can take hours, and also in technology and artificial intelligence. And talking about it in just a few minutes, these 3, it's very complicated, and a suggestion to deal in a different way. I would like to start with a focal point. Before talking about technology, artificial intelligence, it is important to understand transparency. Personally, I believe that public information is an asset that is important for governments to reach, and the authorities as well, to use strategically this information to improve the quality of life of people who live in these regions and countries. As an expert and matter, Eduardo mentions that 3 generations there are of knowledge, which is the one for us to have timely information, to have to the use of public money to know to solve the situation, and the authorities will guide this. And the third is to solve in collaboration. The two first ones, and but there is also an information exchange that meets the demands of information in specific moments, and this way it solves the problems here. I believe that we have to overcome the theoretical debate that information itself change the reality just because they are in the public repository, especially in digital platforms. On the other hand, public policies that will provide quality to this information to be used. In order to do that, we call this transparency. And in Mexico, it's also a government transparency that enables us to understand different realities, generate public knowledge about these realities, and to conduce this information and to thinking about the decision-making process and to improve the public services, and to, in all of it, to improve the quality of life of people. And the government authorities, which have so much information, they have to look into their information policies that can improve this process, but also to guide them for concrete necessities. We have to guarantee the access to information to people, and a second point is to have timely information, and to also to have strategies that will enable us to use this information in a more simple way. How the technology works in this process, using the latest technological advances, they changed our relationship on how we changed our relationships between people and the society, but technology is used in the way to make policies as well, by managing and the communication between authorities and the people that exists today opens a possibility that is endless to generate collaboration and to create digital spaces for the exchange of information and to promote the participation of citizens. And today we have the internet that provides us with timely information, and digital platforms that allow access and the interaction between people, TikTok, YouTube, and other ones, and other digital tools that reduce the time of the process and for authorities. And with that, it was inevitable the use of artificial intelligence, especially in the private sector, where we can see it clearly. People, you can select markets, and it can also encourage products and trend and the product trends as well. We know how the social networks are powerful, and they can identify, and they can, through our search pattern, they can offer us content that will meet our demands. And by providing public services and providing information. And I consider that the future of the transparency is in intelligence, that is what incorporates systematically technology to to be more, let's say, focused in dealing specific solving specific problems. I would like to end my part here by saying lately, I'm sorry the comment here, but I was talking about, I saw a movie that you probably saw. It's called Matrix. It's an old movie. And in December, there'll be the fourth movie. And we're not going to talk about movies in this panel, but there is an interesting idea. So never let a human do a machine's work, right? And I like this idea, which is a total opposite in society, be it controlled in an intelligent way. But our sentence, it also reflects this idea. So let's say that the exclusion, up to where it goes, and the basis in which the policies are used and the use of technology, the basis are the human rights. And this is basically the the engine of the machines and the engine of artificial intelligence. And we cannot lose sight of it, of these rights and its potential weaknesses. So in this postmodern age, we need real-time access to specific situations, certain events. So I would say that the future of transparency is like it's how we use the technologies of information and artificial intelligence in a way that is not only intelligent, but also in a way in creating algorithms and predictive models, everything that I have already mentioned, but not violating privacy of providing access to many types of information. At the end of the day, I believe that there is this correlation between technology, artificial intelligence, and transparency. Transparency, let's say, it's something that has to be projected, and the technology and artificial intelligence are the tools to do this. So I would end my intervention here. Secretary Eliana, Mr. Joshi, and Lieutenant Saki, and I'll stay. I'll pay attention to the rest of here. So thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez. So as you can see, the transparency is fundamental for the development of societies. And however, cannot take place just from an isolated perspective. You have to develop policies that will make information useful, available to solution of conflicts and the solution of problems. And it's important to this information technology to be used in the mechanism of communication between citizens and the institutions. And so this is vital to improve and to develop the better policies that are guided towards the solution of problems. And we have to combine information that we have with these different tools, digital tools that we have. Of course, it's very important to interest in your position, Mr. Alvarez, and about the social networks, but also the protection of human rights and the access to information. So after listening this interesting intervention, now I would like to get back to the debate by making a few questions about to know the expert opinion and to mention one of the questions that you're going to give us the answers. So, and as we start, we're going to give you the questions. Once the governments are already using artificial intelligence and its strategies of development, what are the risks that are part of this process of guaranteeing access to information? So if you want to answer, or if you want to say this, you can raise your hand, or you can write on the chat.
O meu som está aberto já, né? Posso falar? Eu acho que essa pergunta, ela passou todas as falas, acho, até aqui, né? E eu acho que existem questões bem importantes e acho que eu gostaria agora de destacar o que o Josh falou das questões técnicas e das barreiras técnicas, né? Então, uma dificuldade óbvia que se impõe quando a gente está falando dessas tecnologias é que a gente está direcionando um debate que pode ser muito técnico, né, para dar transparência, para falar das decisões e do acesso à informação de decisões que implicam na vida das pessoas. E como empoderar as pessoas, como trazer as pessoas para o debate, né? Quer dizer, e as pessoas, assim, os cidadãos, né? Ou a gente, ou quem não é exatamente, quem não é técnico, por exemplo, né? Quem não é da computação, não é da área de machine learning. Então, é extremamente importante, e a gente tem no debate de transparência, né?
Mesmo quando very important. Sorry, I was in the wrong channel, and as we're talking about the technology, And we were talking about the expenses, and we're talking about information that are extremely technical, and that keep people away from this debate. So, in a way, the challenges might be might be considered the same. How we can translate this information so that more people can be part of this debate and can understand what is going on. So this people, as Mr. Joshi mentioned, will have access to the source code and to the tools that will not be able to be understood by everyone, but there might be an audit by technicians of these tools. So I believe that this detail is extremely important and is fundamental, and there have been discussions about when we want transparency, and there are APIs of public spending, and there is no panel in which you can look at it. We're just providing this information for technicians, and we need to include more people into this debate, and we have to do it in a more integrated way, and keeping with this in mind, not to exclude people from the debate. Yes, Mr. Yoshi, you have the floor.
Thank you. I also think, in addition, sorry, I didn't catch a little bit of what you said, but I think one of the big problems that we've noticed in regards to transparency is the lack of documentation. The fact that the information that we're asking about simply does not exist. And this is because there is no paper trail, there is no auditability, that the people creating the systems did not record very important parts of the system that, as freedom of information advocates, or as the general public, or as public administrators, we might want to know about. Either it was not recorded in the process of the creation, or the information was not sent over to the government department that's relevant. And of course, the way in which many of these laws are designed for public transparency, the buck stops at the government department. So if they don't have the information, they will likely not try to get it from somewhere else. So we need to, I think one important way to counter this is both to have clear, especially in government procurement contracts, to have clear responsibilities for how an audit trail can be created by the person who is creating the system and supplying it to the government, and what that audit trail should have. That it should designate that the data is, segregated in a particular way, that that the information that's used in the creation of an AI system particularly gives you information about what personal information was used, what categories of information were used, and also what kind of choices were made when building the algorithm. Because you can have a simple algorithm that was used, a simple kind of linear regression mathematical model, or you can use a much more complex technique to get similar results. But those have to be negotiated by the developer of the system. Now, how were those choices made? Often we have no idea. And often the government department also has no idea. So these kind of details have to be included within an audit trail. And I think a good way of doing that is by having these obligations within the procurement contract that government departments are signing.
Muchas gracias, señor Yoshi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yoshi. Well, the answers are very interesting that were given here. We have a lot of risks that are involved, that are part in this process to guarantee information, and you have to develop a simple language for everyone to understand these processes, because the use of artificial intelligence is basically a specialized sector. And this provokes an isolated usage, and if one hand it is available, its use of the information is very restricted. That's why it's important to find information so that the benefits of the information can be broadly distributed to more people. Of course, always respecting the use of the right to privacy in the use of this data. Now, so for us to continue, I'm going to ask the following question. What are the ethical principles that you consider that will be using the artificial intelligence. Would you like to speak, Francisco? Yes, thank you very much. I would like to talk about something that our colleagues mentioned here. And some time ago, I was reading an article that is called "The Conversation" on a website that shows how the artificial intelligence has enabled the creation of tools, and the same article shows how I think it is in Silicon Valley where you can hear the firing of a gun, and it's to do, and this data was connected to the 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 police stations can locate a person by just listening to a firing of a gun. Also, it can be used in traffic problems and car traffic problems. And there is an article that shows that there are controversies regarding this. And especially, there is one case that is mentioned on this web page in California, where there was a police control, but the Human Rights Association denounced this AI because it says that this data is not objective, and that created an obstacle in the poorest neighborhoods. And I believe that for us to have transparent policies with citizens' participation and protection of data, it's important it's important to have a more closer interpretation to the law, and by someone. Let's say the AI, the algorithms are designed to have this predictive models and to provide a solution considering a specific problem. But it's also always important is, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, to have one. So we need a specific criteria that is connected to the law to on how to adjust this AI. And if that's the case, where there is a reduction of or a constraint of human rights, and to stop using these AIs or to suppress them. Okay, Juliana? So I'd like to approach another issue that is exactly the issue of algorithm discrimination and the quality in many different cases of predictive models. So what are these models? Something that we see is that we are predicting the future based on data from the past. And it's also always important to rethink what these tools are showing us and why we want them. And to give you a more concrete example, some time ago, the press has dealt with the tools from Amazon for personnel selection. And this algorithm was trained based on people who had been hired the previous years. So what is the bias of this hiring? They were basically men that are in technical positions in these companies. And if you think I want to develop an algorithm to continue hiring people who I already hired with the same profile, I don't want to change the profile within my company. If that's what you want, that's exactly what you're doing. But if the company has a diversity policy and it tries trying to change their hiring practices, this data is not important. So in private companies, this is a tool that is being used very often. Bothers me very much when I think about issues of courts that are using tools to facilitate the use of legal precedents. And what are we talking about? We're talking about using tools that are going to help judges to be more, to make judgments more effectively and based on the decisions that were already made. And we're basically reinforcing these legal precedents, and that might be what you want. But at the same time, it might give some efficiency to these judgments without reflecting well enough whether it's important to change previous decisions. So there is a bias of keeping reality, and that might mean that you are still continuing with the biases in the society that is unequal, because this data will reflect discriminatory practices and unequal practices. If we keep using this without the proper reflection and without giving it much thought about this tool, we might end up in a situation that we're basically repeating the past, right? Not getting out of it, which might be a little bit frightening. So this aspect is very important, and especially for the design of the tool, how the interaction is taking place between people and machines. Because nowadays here in Brazil, in our research, no tools make decisions by themselves. A judge will read them. But how is this judge going to look at this text that was suggested by the algorithm? Is he going to say okay, or he's going to say no? This is just going to be the basis of the beginning of a process. So this kind of interaction between man and machine is of great relevance, and we have to think too about the impacts that might cause. So I believe that it is a guiding principle that should be used when using this, when making decisions within the public administration that has the goal to improve people's lives. Thank you very much. We have a question here from the audience, and that states in the chat: I would like to know your opinion on the use of neuron networks that are very more and more common and efficient concerning the capacity of measure or assessing or measurement. How do you open these black boxes? Okay, now you have the floor. Maybe the question was not so clear. Okay, Yoshi, all right, good, go ahead.
I mean, that's a good question, and I think it's one that a lot of effort is going into to understand how can we make deep neural networks, which are very difficult to understand. As I mentioned, often even the programmers don't know how the system comes up with the results that it comes up with. But there are some methods, some interesting studies that are going on into creating explainable AI. And that's the technical state of the field. It's called XAI. So that's something that I think government should really follow, especially when they're using these models. They should keep in touch with the latest methods of creating explainability and transparency, the technical methods for auditing these systems. But there's also other ways. So explainable AI is about, for example, trying to look at what how changing the inputs of a particular neural network might change the outputs, and then seeing by studying the difference between inputs and outputs to understand how the system works. That's one method. Another is to clearly classify the kind of data that's being used. So for example, some researchers have come up with this model called data sheets for data sets, which tries to categorize how data is used in the process of making a neural network. And just understanding the data that goes into it can also provide a lot of insight into how that system is ultimately functioning. Then Google has also introduced something called model cards, which give small explanations of each model and how it works and how it functions. And those model cards are introduced when any of the systems are being used for general explainability of the system. So there are steps like this. There are kind of technical measures through which neural networks can also be made more explainable. But I think that it is a big problem. Even scientists and developers have said that neural networks are one of the most complex technologies, which are really very difficult. And they make decisions in ways that human beings can't comprehend. They don't make decisions the way you and I make decisions, but in a totally alien way. So ultimately, we might never know exactly what's going into how the systems function.
A gente queria só rapidinho contribuir.
I would like to contribute with the discussion here. One of something that we have in trying to access the information to the source code that is used, or in trying to understand how these neural networks work. One possibility is to have social control through reverse engineering and to use the results to try to get to the data to see what is going on within it. So you make an analysis of how this data are being given and to assess this source code, whether it represents or not risks and what is presenting to us. If there is discrimination, if a tool that it can be used to combat fraud is discriminating specific groups without real reasons, and it might have a bias. So many times we might not understand the mechanism in itself. It's still possible to have social control of these results that are given. That's why it's important to make the source code open or to have access to all of these results and the data, the input data and the output data as well. Thank you for your comment, Mr. Yoshi and Juliana. And without shadow of a doubt, the use of the artificial intelligence has brought benefits to us to solve many problems, ethical problems, and but there are many risks that we have nowadays. We can see in regarding privacy. Sometimes personal data are exposed, and it might cause bad misuse of information. And it's important to have public policies that are guided to safeguard the privacy of people. And we have to think about a situation in which we can use the benefits of artificial intelligence without violating privacy. And these tools should avoid these discrimination models because they should have the goal as to improve the life of population. Now we're going to go to the last question of the day, and that is, how can governments promote transparency and implement mechanisms to audit the data and the algorithms? So your mics are open. You can say it. Okay, Professor. Thank you very much. So the question was to audit the algorithms? Oh, yes, good. So I consider the public policies, let's say that when they establish their goals, the transparency politics, they usually give the information, and the information might be geared towards specific profiles and to, for example, parents, fathers and students, and a marginalized group as well. So I believe that the technological tools, and since there are criteria to standardize the platforms, as Mr. Yoshi mentioned recently, there are criteria for hiring and to a platform that can use specific principles and that follow international standards. The same way, if you use a specific algorithm or an AI that will help you solve a public problem or a specific demand, you should consider that in every moment this AI will have some controls that will stop a violation of rights and protect the privacy, and that will alert there might be a risk because and in the moment when it is executed, this might create a situation in which the AI will differentiate whether there is values that are imbued in it. And maybe this will be a little bit hard to be done, but there should be processes to audit, to be able to audit these algorithms in a more complete way. And I'd like to compliment by saying that it's extremely important for the government to define minimum requirements of active transparency for these algorithms, and especially algorithms that might impact on human rights. We're not talking about like a simple algorithm, but it's important to regulate an assessment by when developing or buying or procuring specific algorithms. There have to be specific requirements of transparency requirements for us to monitor and for governments to be able to have it under control. So besides the impact reports, to provide information on what kind of tool is being developed and what the goal of the tool is. So I see it's necessary to move forward and with the specific with legal framework as European Union has moved forward with the Artificial Intelligence Act to establish minimum requirements of transparency and to guarantee that the human rights will be respected. On the we have this law to make requirements, the access information to make requests of data, and for us to map and to have a partnership. It's important for active transparency to be possible and to know what kind of access you can grant or not, and information that what kind of on what kind of data can be shown in terms of privacy. Thank you very much. So it's a major challenge that the government has to implement public policies as well as legislation that is necessary to strengthen technologies. But when creating public policies, the government has to take into account patterns so that they don't damage rights. And the legislation has to be the first step to count with instruments so that we can follow the implementation of these algorithms and preventing risks. And in order to do that, we need security measures. In this way, we are closing the interventions, and I only have to thank the brilliant presentation of our speakers in the day today. Thank you very much, Juliana Sakai, Mr. Joshi, and thank you, Mr. Alvarez as well. That presented interesting reflections on the current challenges of transparency on digital governments. It's sure that we are in a digital age that is moving forward very fast when governments have to adapt to new technology tools to improve their services and taking into account a more active role Now more than ever, the transition of digital governments allows society to have access to a considerable volume of information. And we could hear that from our speakers that having information is not enough. For we have to manage the transparency for a generation of information that will be useful and for the decision-making process in society. And that the public administration can use this and should. And we have an element that is vital for us to solve problems of effectiveness, transparency, and of course, accountability, which will make it easy to provide an interaction between government and citizens. In this way, thank you very much all that are attending this conference, the international conference of information commissioners, with such an interesting topic. And this way, we're going to conclude this event that allowed us to see the importance and the challenges of transparency in digital government. Once again, thank you very much, and may you have a great day. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and may you have a great day, Secretary Yana and Yoshi, too. Thank you very much, everyone.
Recording stop.